I go back to what I said earlier that, this too shall pass. It is upon us to see how best to leverage the environments we are in to not only hone our own craft, but to see how to build those lasting relationships with our teams, with our business, with our users.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started here, could you just tell us quickly who you are and who you work for, please?
Yes, I'm Smruti Patel, VP of Engineering at Apollo Graph. We focused on building the next generation API platform in this world of microservices.
And then in a couple of weeks' time, you're going to be joining us at Lead Dev Berlin. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about there?
Yes, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. It's my first time in Berlin. I've been with Lead Dev for a few years now, so excited to talk to that community and the audience here. My topic for this conversation is how do you think about growth in a downturn? And we all used to a glorious decade and more of tech. And the last year's shown us that things are looking very, very different. So how do we adapt ourselves? How do we show up for our teams? But how do we also leverage this period in tech's history to think about enduring growth? And that's something that I'm going to talk about right here.
Yeah, unfortunately, a really hot topic, but a really important one. And I think there are going to be a lot of managers in the room. There's a lot of managers out there that have never experienced something like this. They've only managed teams in the kind of growth years, in the hyper growth years. What's one of the things that you've learned about the difference between managing in the boom times to maybe managing during a downturn?
Yeah, for me, the biggest thing about the current period is, hey, it starts with survival. Survive first, then thrive. And to do that, because it's a shift in mindset, it's a lot about how do you work with a scarcity mindset versus abundance. And what does that mean in how we lead our teams? And a big part of my journey going through not just the current one, but also whether it was the 2001 or the 2008, where we did see some dips, has all been about starting from within. How do I adapt my leadership style? And before I even go there, how do I acknowledge what I'm going through? It's a tough time. Things look very different than they historically did. So how do you start from feeling secure, being vulnerable, knowing where you are at on any given day, so you can then lead your teams through some of that. And the biggest thing there is to then take this to your teams to be able to say, hey, things do look different when we think about what we should invest in versus what we absolutely need to invest in now. How do you think about driving efficiency, driving leverage? A lot of that starts looking very different. And so a big thing there is how do you drive clarity? How do you drive focus and balance, whether it's in the tactical short-term engineering needs, but also leveraging this period to drive those strategic long-term innovation. Because we're all aware that the best startups that we know of or the big companies we know of did start during a downturn.
It absolutely did. Yeah, there is a really strong through line there. And I love that first part that you said about taking the time to kind of get yourself in order before you can kind of be there for your teams. I think a lot of managers skip that step and go straight to the execution mode. Right, things have changed, we have to change. And they don't kind of take the time to like process and like start to work through the stages. Do you have, this might be getting too much into your talk, but do you have a kind of framework for how you work through those stages in a much more kind of thoughtful way than just diving in when a big change like this happens?
Yeah, so I think for my framework, when it starts with, you and your mindset, it's about how do you drive self-awareness, adaptability, and resilience. That's when you're starting with your own self. And then when you're thinking about your team, how do you think about driving clarity and setting expectations in what is truly needed? And a lot of that comes down to the impact. How can you and the team drive the most leverage for the business? And here, if the big part of hypergrowth is all about saying yes, these times are all about what are you intentionally and strategically saying no to? And that requires us to sort of rethink our opportunities. And here's where, there's this phrase of, hey, doing more with less. And for me, the way I see it, it's not so much as more with less, but it's driving more value with relatively less. And what do I mean by that? It's a lot about how you think of capping your risk or your unknown unknowns. How do you better align with your leadership and figure out if you are driving most leverage for the business? So my framework for this is, starting from within, you're driving that adaptability, you're driving self-awareness and resilience, but you also are very aware of what that North Star is and what the true leverage for the business looks like, because that has also evolved. The business has had to adapt to these new times as well. And therein, how are you then being the bridge with your team, driving that clarity, setting better expectations? And lastly, to round it all up, it's about culture. These times are hard times. And a lot of that is, you're not playing in easy mode anymore. You're playing in that hard mode in some ways. How do we create that culture of, no zero-sum games, no hunger games, but more around leveraging this period to truly hone the craft, whether it's of engineering or engineering leadership, and creating more space to be creative about individual growth and team growth?
Yeah, I really love that. It's like engineering leadership on the difficult setting now. And I think that shift is a really interesting one because at the end of the day, engineers are problem solvers, and I think these new sets of constraints should be an exciting challenge for engineers. But you can't jump straight to that, can you? As a leader, you kind of have to bring them along, but then you hope that these new sets of constraints, this new kind of having to deliver as much value from kind of a smaller footprint of projects and resources, is a really interesting management challenge. Have you kind of got the secret to taking people on that journey, or have you kind of figured out any way to bring people along on your own way?
I think for me, it starts with trust and transparency. I think when the periods are as hard as they are for each of us now, the biggest thing as leaders we can do is create that psychological safety. And a big part of that safety is having empathy for your own teams, having that, what that pulse on engagement, like where is your team at, and then where are individuals at, and what can you do to lead with that trust and be transparent about where the business is headed, where your plans for the team are headed. And when I think about creating that psychological safety, it's a lot about those intentional conversations with individuals on your team to say, hey, is the team getting more scope? Is the team losing scope because maybe the business has pivoted to new opportunities? And in that, can you still create space for innovation? Because economies are cyclical, and this too shall pass. And so when the good times are here, you can ride that wave if you have made those right investments. So how do you think about rebalancing scope with folks who are hungry, who are eager to grow? And therein, when I think about career development, which is a big passion of mine, I think there's no time like now to be building those new skills. Like, for example, on our teams, there are folks who only knew Java and who like, hey, I want to pick up Rust. How do I help out on this other project, which has now become a big business priority? There's a full stack engineer who wanted to grow into backend distributed systems. And we said, okay, how do we sort of use, what the environment's thrown at us to level up and give those people who want to stretch themselves and build their toolkit these new opportunities? And the last one here for me is helping our teams build and extend network. And here's where I've often found that underrepresented folks, they're over-mentored, but under-sponsored. And so in these times, how can you help open up those doors, especially in these conditions, by connecting the right person to the right opportunity, even if they may not report into you? So there's a few things that I have worked on this year and in the past when such times have come in. It comes down to not only being creative about new opportunities, but being very thoughtful and intentional and transparent with individuals on the team, knowing exactly where they are in their careers.
No, I really love that opportunity for career growth element of this. In the past, you probably would have just hired a Rust developer to fill that gap. But now there is a big opportunity because a lot of people are operating under hiring freezes, or their budgets have been cut, and they do have to stretch people into those areas. So there is a big opportunity there, and it's a really nice way to think about it. I'd like to fast forward a little bit to you've just finished delivering your talk. What do you hope that people take away at the end?
Yeah, I'm truly hoping that it is normalized in some ways to know that you're not alone. Each of us are in this, we're in this together. And I go back to what I said earlier, that this too shall pass. It is upon us to see how best to leverage the environments we are in, to not only hone our own craft, but to see how to build those lasting relationships with our teams, with our business, with our users. And in that, it's like, how do you drive empathy for your users, engagement on your teams, and then efficiency for the business, the 3 E's. And what I'm hoping our audience takes away is, how do you build some of that adaptability and resilience into your own toolkit, such that, we can take our teams through some of this chaos, which unfortunately we're not at the end of, but into that sustained, enduring growth.
All right, Smruti, thank you so much for doing this. I am really excited to hear this talk in person in Berlin later on this year. Have a good rest of your day.